In the previous episode, we journeyed through the early years of HIV treatment, from the first approved drug AZT to the revolutionary introduction of HAART in 1996. Today, we turn our gaze to another part of the globe and another chapter in this story, the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the emerging world of African continent during the 90s and early 2000s. In the early 2000s, while the Western world was celebrating the arrival of HAART, the picture was starkly different in Africa. HIV was ravaging communities, with millions infected and no access to life-saving treatments available elsewhere. The most affected were the young and the poor, but no one was truly safe. And yet, the world seemed to turn a blind eye. Stigma was another brutal enemy, one that hit just as hard, if not harder, than the virus itself. A positive HIV diagnosis back in the day wasn't just a medical verdict. It was also a social death sentence. Picture a teacher, pillar of her community, who was diagnosed with HIV. No longer seen as an educator and a mentor, she was just reduced to her HIV status. Parents withdrew their children from her class. Friends avoided her in the market, and she was dismissed from the job she loved. She was the same person, but the stigma attached to HIV changed how everyone saw her. Or consider a young man, the sole breadwinner for his family, who tested positive. Suddenly, he was unemployable, not because he couldn't work, but because of the pervasive fear and misunderstanding of HIV. His family, instead of being a source of support, abandons him out of fear and shame. And amidst this climate of fear and desperation, there were those who sought to exploit the vulnerable. In the absence of affordable, accessible treatment, people were driven to seek out alternative solutions, no matter how dangerous or unproven. Rumors spread about miracle cures and unconventional treatments, leading some people to abandon their antiretroviral drugs if they even had access to them, in favor of these supposed remedies. So many individuals promised cures in the form of herbs, potions, or spiritual rituals, often at a steep price. These treatments, devoid of any specific scientific backing, not only failed to combat the virus, but often led to serious health complications. For example, there were cases of individuals selling holy water, alleged to cure HIV, exploiting people's faith and desperation. There were instances of quack doctors prescribing harmful or ineffective treatment, promising a cure if only patients would hand over their life savings. Even more tragically, there were reports of dangerous rituals, sometimes involving physical harm or even sexual abuse. These practices not only failed to cure HIV, but they further victimized those already suffering, adding more trauma and pain to their lives. Such malpractices were a devastating testament to how desperation, lack of knowledge, and absence of accessible legitimate treatment could lead to manipulation and exploitation. And then there were those who lived under the constant shadow of suspicion. Mothers, fathers, and children, forced to hide their status to avoid being ostracized by their community. The fear of this rejection was so strong that many chose not to get tested. They would rather live in ignorance than face the potential social isolation that came with the positive diagnosis. This refusal to get tested had a devastating consequence. It further fueled the spread of the virus. By choosing not to know their status, many people unknowingly transmitted the virus to others, propagating a cycle of infection and death. The death toll was staggering, but amidst the despair, there were sparks of resistance. Activists, many of them living with HIV, were fighting for their right to live. They took to the streets, demanding access to the treatments that were readily available in wealthier countries. Their battle wasn't just with the disease, but also with the multinational pharmaceutical companies who held the patents for these life-saving drugs. These companies, citing cost of research and development, refused to lower their prices or allow generic versions to be produced. Their stance sparked an outcry. The documentary Fire in the Blood paints a striking picture of struggle for affordable HIV treatment. It showcases the profound courage and resilience of activists like Zaki Ahmed, a South African who, despite being HIV positive, refused antiretroviral drugs until they were universally accessible in his country. Echoing this fight on the global stage was Yusuf Hamid, the CEO of Cipla, an Indian generic drug manufacturer. Hamid shocked the world when he proposed providing generic versions of HIV drugs to Africa at a fraction of the price set by major pharmaceutical companies. For Hamid, this wasn't a profit-making strategy, but an immense effort to save lives. However, this general proposal ignited significant controversy. Pharmaceutical giants, fearing a slip in their profits, vehemently protested. Their argument? Allowing generic drugs would sabotage the motivation for developing new treatments. But the battle didn't stop there. The World Trade Organization, or WTO, had established trade rules that fiercely protected pharmaceutical patents, a move ostensibly aimed at encouraging innovation. In reality, these rules were making it nearly impossible for Cipla to manufacture and export these life-saving generic drugs to Africa, ironically turning an innovation incentive into a death sentence. The documentary Fire in the Blood brings to life this intense conflict between corporate profit and human survival, between patent rights and the right to life. It serves as a stark reminder of the real-world consequences of global trade policies and corporate decisions. Then, in 2001, came a pivotal moment that drastically altered the landscape of HIV treatment in Africa. The Doha Declaration on the TRIPS Agreement and Public Health was passed, allowing developing countries to override patents for public health purposes. This marked a significant shift in the balance of power. For the first time, countries devastated by HIV and AIDS epidemic could legally import generic versions of patented HIV drugs. India, often referred to as the pharmacy of the developing world, was one of the countries that played a crucial role in supplying these low-cost generic antiretroviral drugs. This milestone did not come easily. It was a result of years of tireless advocacy and protests by health activists around the world. But its impact was transformative. Millions of lives were saved, and it marked the beginning of a steady decline in the HIV and AIDS-related deaths in Africa. Now, as we close this chapter, it's impossible not to feel the weight of what we've just discussed. The struggle against HIV and AIDS in Africa during the 90s and early 2000s was much more than a health crisis. It was a fight against social stigma, against ignorance and fear, and against the cold calculus of profits and patents. But the journey doesn't end here. The road to fighting HIV and AIDS underwent another radical transformation when the global medical community combined efforts with one goal in mind: bringing people living with HIV to an undetectable viral load. What does undetectable mean? And how did this concept revolutionize our approach to HIV? Tune in to our next episode of Sex Ed Bites, where we will unravel the story behind the slogan, "You equals you," an equation that brought hope to millions.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Together, let's build a world where sex education is a human right.